What's up, guys? Matt here, back for today's edition of Every Day in the Word, and I'm excited to finish up the book of 1 Samuel here today. It's an interesting book, interesting stuff going on, some famous stories, David and Goliath, David running away from Saul. So this story basically comes to a crashing halt with the death of Saul here in chapter 31 today. But we're starting here in chapter 29. Chapter 29, chapter 30, and chapter 31 is our reading today. And so we see David here. Remember, he's fleeing from Saul at this point, and he goes to the land of the Philistines, so the bad guys. Remember, Goliath was a Philistine. So he goes to the bad guys' land, and he lives there, and they're cool with it, at least at the beginning. And now in chapter 29, they tell him to just go home. They don't want to have David, this anointed king of Israel, living in their midst anymore. And so they send him home. And then chapter 30, we see this interesting story of the Amalekites come in and conquer these people and take captive all these women and children, who included with that group was David's wives and kids. So 2 of his wives got taken and his kids got taken. And so David, he's confused. He's like, should I go after them? Should I not? And he does, in just this unlikely way. He uses this Egyptian who was hungry and weak, and God used him and this Egyptian and some other guys to go and to conquer these people. And just kind of an incredible story here of him basically saving his family. And then chapter 31 is where I want to focus in here, because this is the death of Saul. And so this is obviously very significant because Saul has been the king of Israel up until this point. I know David was anointed, but Saul was the one who had the crown on his head, leading the people, leading the charge. And so in chapter 31, he dies while in battle. He basically asks someone to kill him. He's killing himself. This is a suicide. And then we see this interesting story here at the end in verse 8 and beyond, where his body was getting basically humiliated. They were dragging his body around. They were just basically just destroying his body. And then they took his body to this place. They fastened it to the wall of Beth Shan, which is this area out kind of in the middle of nowhere, this Roman area out in the middle of nowhere in Israel, which I actually got to go to and got to see these walls that Saul's body was pinned up against. And then these men, the men of Jabesh Gilead, so these godly guys, they go and they take Saul's body and they go and they give him a burial to basically respect and honor the king. Remember, this is a big deal. This is the king of the people of Israel. So this is like the president of the United States. When the president dies, he gets a very ceremonial burial with the American flag draped over him. It's got a lot of news. Now imagine the president's body just getting dragged around, pinned on walls. So these men here, they went and saved Saul's body. Even though he was an evil king, they still respected him enough because he was the anointed one at this point. And so just a really interesting story here in chapter 31. But tomorrow we're going to turn the page quite literally to 2 Samuel, which in the Hebrew Bible it's one book, but in our English Bibles we've got two books, and it kind of differentiates Saul being in charge and David being in charge. And so we're going to see in the next few days David, how he really comes to the throne. I know he's been anointed at this point, but his ascent to the throne is a little unique. So we're going to be learning that here in the next few days. But now let's go over to the book of John. John chapter 11, we're picking it up here at the end of this book, starting in verse 54 and going through chapter 12, verse 20, I want to say, verse 19. And we see this amazing picture here in the beginning of chapter 12 of Mary anointing Jesus with this really expensive oil. And we see Judas Iscariot pipe up and be like, hey, that's expensive oil. We should sell that money and give it to the poor. I don't think Judas is really thinking that. I think he was wanting that money for himself because he was the one that was in charge of the money bags for the disciples. And so, again, we see Judas Iscariot be the bad guy that he is. But anyway, we see Mary do this really expensive sacrifice by taking this really expensive oil and pouring it on Jesus, but to show her love and compassion and her sacrifice for Jesus. So it's just a great reminder for us of sacrifice for Jesus today. or for God, for obeying God, the sacrifice that you need to make. It requires great cost for you to serve God, to sacrifice your wants and your desires and your freedom to serve God. It's an expensive way that we do it sometimes with the church. Maybe you don't, because you don't have any money right now, but when you get older, you start giving part of your paycheck to the church because you love the church, because you want to give back to God. And so that's kind of the idea here, that there's this pain involved, there's this sacrifice involved, and that's what Mary here shows us in John chapter 12. And then we see the triumphal entry here, which I know we've covered when we were going through the book of Mark and Luke as well. But that's obviously Jesus coming in at the beginning of the Passion Week. So great story there today in John chapter 11. But now let's go over to the book of Psalms. We've got Psalm 118 in the shadows of Psalm 119, which we will get to in 2 days. But Psalm 18, it's a great psalm. It's a really encouraging one, talking about God being our strength and our refuge. And just even the reminder here at the beginning, verse 2 through 4, we see this reminder of God's great love, his steadfast love that endures forever. That's a theme throughout the Psalms, praising God for his steadfast love, for his covenant love that he placed on Israel, loving them even when they disobeyed him. Just a great reminder of that covenant love here today, and just a reminder that God is close, God is near, God is your salvation if you are a Christian, God is your refuge and your strength if you are a Christian. So a great psalm for you to just read today, read it slowly, reflect on it, even pray through some of the words that you see there, some of the phrases that you see there, but a great one for us to reflect on here today. But now let's go over, finish it up in the book of Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 15, verse 24 through 26, it says, "The path of life leads upward for the prudent, that he may turn away from Sheol beneath. The Lord tears down the house of the proud, but maintains the widow's boundaries. The thought of the wicked are an abomination to the Lord, but gracious words are pure." Just a reminder for us to pursue righteousness, to pursue wisdom, to pursue prudence. We see that there in verse 24, that the path of life, it leads upward for the prudent. So if you are trying to love and serve God with your life, it will go well with you. It is the way of life, it says. It's the path of life, and it's leading upward. If you're pursuing that wisdom from God, that we can always go before him and ask, as we learn in James chapter 1. I was reading that this morning, just about the fact that we can go to God and ask him for wisdom and trust him for that wisdom. Just always a great reminder for us that God is near to us, as we just saw in Psalm 118. But something just for you to take away today is to pursue wisdom today. There's great blessing, there's great reward if you do that. So I hope that you would do that today as we read the Bible. Hopefully you are able to now, as soon as this video is done, to go apply it in your life right now. That's the whole point of this. That's the whole reason why we do this. So that's another edition of Every Day in the Word, but we'll be back tomorrow for another edition because I love explaining and teaching the Bible to you guys. So we'll see you tomorrow.